So, I just got done watching a pretty cool show that I really enjoy called The Umbrella Academy. Started watching it, like most of us did right when it came out, close to the pandemic and that whole Michigas. Um, and it kind of got me thinking about endings and relationships. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, tonight, now, anyway. Um, and it kind of seems to have settled on a strata that came across with some interesting things. Being the cinephile TV lover that I am, last year last year we got Stranger Things, and it closed out, and I really enjoyed that ending, and some people really, really didn't, and I was confused because you got an ending, you got your closure, and but some people were mad because they didn't get the ending that they really wanted. And to me, that's just silly. Because an ending isn't defined by what you want, it's defined by it ending. So, what we're going to kind of, or what I would like to kind of go over is my experiences with endings and relationships and closure and that sort of thing. Um, Now, the whole reasoning for me wanting to talk about this was a real interesting discovery that I made at my local bookstore, where I came across this one, Jim Butcher's latest in the Dresden Files, called 12 Months. And believe me, I was thrilled to find it. I didn't expect it because after, we'll call it a nice round 17 years of reading the Dresden Files and having an epic battle and so on and so forth. You can see I have the whole collection here on my shelf here, except for one that I loaned to an army buddy who never returned it, but I will replace it at some point. Point being, I had thought that series was over and done with, and then it turns out he had one more in him. Maybe more. Who's to say? And I wasn't... mostly my experience was kind of strange because, to my mind, the Dresden Files is one of the great experiences in reading that I've had in my life. And if I had my druthers, I would develop the hell out of it into an awesome series on TV. And we'll get to that. That's a whole other project. Point being, I thought it was finished, but as 12 Months by Jim Butcher, good friend of mine. Not really. I just would love to be, because the dude does some of my favorite writing. Anyway, I thought we were done, but he proved me wrong. And I wasn't mad about it at all, hence my buying the hardback, because, writers need to eat too. I know, I am one, and I like to eat every day. Most days, in fact. Anyhow, endings, closure, relationships. These are three things that are indelibly linked, and at this point in our history as a culture, we have this tendency to get really wrapped up in how things are ending. And I think that kind of comes down to expectations and a sense of entitlement. So, coming back to Stranger Things, I don't think that ended badly. I even got a little choked up at the end, and yeah, maybe I'm a little bit prone to getting that way, and because I like to let myself live, as you'll find out, as an exposed nerve in the universe. Willing to feel all of those things because that's how it works. So when I had this idea for this discussion tonight, my thinking was closures in a story are great because you get them. Closures in actual relationships are different. They're a little muddy. But that doesn't make the relationship better or worse as a result. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example that I have from the one that I eponymously call The One That Got Away. For obvious reasons, is that she so got away. And it wasn't for anything one or both of us did. It was doomed to fail from timing primarily. This was a person that I still to this day care very deeply for and occasionally talk to on the, interwebs, but there was a little speck of time, a tiny speck, we'll call it maybe 3-4 months, where I maybe fooled myself into thinking maybe this was the way, this was the person for me, this was finally going to work out, and I was going to have that person, she was going to be mine. And it was, and not like in an ownership sense, but we were going to have each other, we were going to be in that relationship, but it didn't work out that way. And there were years, literally years, where I was really upset about the fact that circumstance got in the way. But then lately, I've been thinking about how that kind of shakes out. And Ethan Hawke recently had this great quote about how unrequited love is never a loss, because the person who does the loving, wins by having loved. And that really struck a chord with me, because I've had those feelings for, maybe more than one person in my life, but this one person in particular, for a long time. And not getting the thing that I want is okay. Not getting the thing that you want is all right. Yeah, it sucks and it hurts, especially if the other person knows how you feel and you have to just kind of soldier on. But finding the ability to learn from that love, requited or unrequited, either one, is important too. I'd rather have the one that got away than never have one at all. Because, that famous chestnut, better to loved and lost, and all that mishigas. But in this case, the part that bothers me about the one that got away is that I never really got to find how it was gonna go. That's the part that haunts me as a storyteller, as a writer, as a filmmaker, is I'll never get to find out what that story really is, because it never really quite got to get started. Oh, I have stories that involve that person, and they probably involve interlocking private parts, and that's not really your business, but that's not a relationship in and of itself. So I just wanted to talk about how getting an ending isn't something you should be so upset about if it's not the ending you want, because at least you got an ending. There's a cap on it. And this kind of, that pertains more to movies and TV, but since I have this weird kind of perspective in life of looking at things through that lens, because I grew up in the sticks in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of my overview of human interaction comes from a lot of TV and movies, and that's fine. I'm not like trying to proclaim that I'm like Abed from Community. Big ups to Abed, because he's awesome. But the point is, when you have that kind of love in your life, even if it doesn't work out, if you got an ending to it, then at least for sure. Excuse me, that was kind of untoward. But relationships they're a fluid, tricky business. And they often don't work out the way you want. And to quote the killer writers of one of my absolute all-time favorite shows, Ted Lasso, rom-communism, kiddos, or, adultos, depending, I don't want to judge. It will all work out. Maybe not how you think it will, or how you hope it does, but it will all work out. You just have to let go. Now, relatively early in my young adultivity, I went through a divorce, and it leveled me to the bedrock. I'm not going to lie to you. It was tough. But what I learned from that experience is that I really cared enough to get hurt that badly. The highs that you're willing to get in a relationship are only as good as the lows that you feel, which is a far cry different than somebody who just hurts you constantly. Because if the ratio to getting hurt to feeling good is such a wide disparity. That's not a good ratio. You got to find a happy middle ground. And I'm not saying you got to meet in the middle and just accept the smallest of hurts for the slightest of highs. I'm saying you got to find the right balance. Because eventually you'll find that person that gives you the high highs, and when you have lows, they're manageable because that person didn't expect to hurt you or is willing to talk to you about it, and you can work through it. And how does this pertain to the endings, as I was mentioning? Well, it mostly doesn't really. Because if you have a really stellar relationship, it doesn't ever quite end. You just kind of learn to keep it in your life. And not all the great relationships you'll have in your life are going to be romantic. I hope that they are, because being the hopeless, ridiculous romantic that I am, I just kind of live for that, but that's not for everybody. Some of your absolute best relationships you'll have are with your friends who become like your family. I've had the same best friend, and I've been blessed to have him in my life for 18 years now. Seriously, my relationship with my best friend is old enough to vote, and I kind of wish it would, because stuff's kind of messed up right now, and maybe more voters would have helped. Anyway, but that relationship never ends, and I've been really fortunate to have that kind of friendship that he has seen me at the absolute lowest, worst points in my life, and he never judged me, never made me feel bad for having those experiences, but he was always there. And if you're really, really lucky, you'll have that kind of relationship in your life with somebody. That relationship that is completely open-ended because you don't have to stress about it being there forever. Endings, as they come out in stories and TV and movies and stuff, are a different deal. We kind of get these parasocial relationships with these shows and these movie series and everything because we feel like we're owed an ending of some kind that meets our standards, because how we bond with those things is really the critical point. And I think that you kind of need to accept an ending for how it is, with a few glaring exceptions. Game of Thrones, I'm looking at you, or How I Met Your Mother, which I think those two were kind of the nadir of what happens when the fandom and their expectations kind of run roughshod right over the writers and the story they're trying to tell. How I Met Your Mother in particular, I think, suffered because they kind of painted themselves into a corner with how that was supposed to end. And I think if I was going to pitch anything, I'd say bring the mother character in, not on the last season, but on like the 8th season, and maybe kind of play with it a little bit. But that's me as a writer, and I'm a sucker for a good story, especially like a good proper romance. Not like a sappy romance like Bridgerton, not my jam. And the OC was fun when I was of a certain age, but now it's just a little tiresome to watch these kids that are terrible for each other but keep trying. Point being, an ending doesn't make a relationship, just like a relationship doesn't automatically make an ending. I think that we've come to this point in our society where we're more worried about how, if there's an ending in mind or not. And I say this as a person who's trying to date, actively. And I keep seeing this phrase come up a lot on women's dating profiles, and I don't think that I'd see it on many men's, but this is just my experience as this guy, is dating with intention. I don't think anybody really dates by accident, and I find that strange. Because, yeah, I'm sure there's a whole swath of people in their 20s that are just out there trying to get the interlocking pieces to interlock, and that's great. Go out, do 2 of everything. It's fine. Do whatever you want, just don't hurt anybody. That being said, dating with intention, I find that a strange phrase. A strange phrase. Is my intention, ultimately, in any romantic entanglement, sexual, maybe, probably, okay, fine, is hopefully to find that person that I just never get tired of, that I'm happy to see every day, that we have that shorthand. But the problem is that we are, as a society now, so used to being able to order almost exactly the thing we want without actually having had it before. Amazon is a good example of this. You can order the most specific item for the most specific task, having never actually laid hands on this object until it shows up. And we think that it's going to show up and slot nicely into this little pocket that we have in our lives. And that's going to be that. Well, you can't order a person like that, a whole person. It doesn't work that way. You can't make an exact checklist and assume that there's going to be that one person that fits exactly all of these boxes, because that's not fair. They shouldn't have to be disqualified from a fantastic relationship because they meet 9 out of 10, but not that 10th one. And that's kind of what I'm saying with the ending thing. And I'm going to go back to the Stranger Things example I started with. A lot of people felt like there was some mystery, like, final episode that was going to come out the week after the fact with the final season of Stranger Things. And I found this very strange. Because we got the ending. They saved Hawkins. They protected each other. They did their thing. We got the great, wonderful, one of my favorite things in movies and TV is the goodbyes when all the characters leave and they have to say goodbye. We got that. We got the cool hand-drawn credits that's kind of like Lord of the Rings, which, Return of the King will always make me cry, and I will never feel bad about it, because why should you? But the point is that you got the ending. You got to find out what happened to those guys at the end. You got to see them on their grand adventures. And then they're going to go out and live their lives. The fact that that ending didn't go the way you wanted it to is the height of hubris. You got the ending. You got the closure. A lot of people don't get that. Fans of Firefly intimately know what I'm talking about. That is a show that is just perfect in 14 episodes. But we don't ever find an ending. And yes, we got Serenity, the feature film, and it's lovely and beautiful and cool as hell. But it's still not quite the same thing as an actual the end. Fans of Firefly and fans of Game of Thrones, where their Venn diagrams don't overlap, is in an ending. So what I'm getting at with this entire meandering diatribe is that an ending of a relationship is not the relationship itself. All of those things have value. And either, whether it's a relationship like I've got with my boy Harry Dresden, or a relationship that you might have with your person or people, again, don't want to be assumptive, or, the relationship that you get from your comfort show. How it ends is less important than how you value it. And that might seem like an oversimplification, because there are some relationships that end so badly, the circumstances of them ending overshadows their entirety. And I'll give you an example, is that I have a really significant ex, and I was ready to build a whole life and have a whole home with that person, and turns out that they were being less than honest with me. And if I have one thing that I need in my life, it's stability in the actual home space. And she took that from me from lying by omission. That really affects my opinion of that person as they exited my life. However, asterisk, big, radioactive, glowy, pulsating, whatever, that relationship meant a lot to me, because it taught me a ton about who I am, the things that I want out of life, out of a potential partner. And that includes having, standards, some modicum of expectations. but don't let your expectations or your preferences overwhelm the experience of being in that relationship, watching that show or that movie or whatever. Going through a really long form story is not hugely dissimilar to being in a relationship with another person. The only real difference is that, going through a long form story, movie series, TV, etc., book series, is a very one sided experience because you just have the experience. You don't have any input. But you, as a person in a relationship with another person, have to be willing to communicate, have to be willing to accept things that are out of your control. But compromise is important. You can have your standards, but be willing to flex a little bit. Maybe some people will surprise you. My most recent significant ex, who who she herself has dubbed my favorite ex, and that's actually true. When that relationship, closed, she was leaving the country. Voluntarily. It was a whole work thing. Anyway, I realized that I was made better by having that person in my life, even though they left. So maybe be more considerate of those experiences that you have and less incensed by the things you didn't get on their way out. So just that's kind of where I want to end is relationships that you have, be them with the stories that you love or the people that, come into your life, they kind of need you to accept them. Which isn't to say that you can't feel the way you feel. By all means, please feel the way you feel. Grab a hold of those feelings with both hands. Don't let go of it. Again, exposed nerve in the universe. Be willing to feel those things. But be happy even at the end of it for the great things that you got out of it. Because I promise you, there's going to be a lot more things that you're happy to have had in your life, even if they don't have a definitive cap or an end that you were happy about, than the really wonderful endings. Because when you have a wonderful ending to something, it will stick out much more prominently. And that might seem confusing, but there's a reason that I say it that way. It's that if you think about the ending that you want, and that might be the ending with a big E, like the end of your life, versus the endings, plural, that you encounter throughout your life, is it more important for you that everything end on your terms, or is it more important that you have a few really wonderful endings, great chapters, specific times in your life that you can point to and say, I met this person here, and I knew them through this point, and all of that time was amazing up until here. Now, obviously, if everything until here and after is horrible, obviously you get a pass. But being the optimist that I am, despite so much hard crud in the world and all the shit that we have to deal with, an ending is something that you need to hold on to, not as a goalpost, not as a guide stone, but as something that can happen at any point. Because if you're invested and you love it, or that person, when you get to that point, remember all the good that they brought into your life. And don't hold a grudge. Please don't hold a grudge. It doesn't serve any purpose. It just aggravates and upsets. And life is short. You gotta spend it well. And there's so much better use for your energy, you beautiful bastard. Maybe you're watching this with friends. I don't know. So just be willing to go through it. Start at the beginning. Go through something. Even if it doesn't end the way you hope it does or think it will, at least you got there. Find it and hang on to it. It's worth it in the end. So, that's what we're going to leave you with tonight. Going forward, I think we're going to kind of do a little more loose goose kind of a business. The H.P. Lovecraft project has been going badly this week. Writer's block is a real beast. Having this outlet is really great. I'm happy to discuss anything you'd like. Yes, it is actually whiskey, and I'm not going to feel bad about it because I'm an adultish person of a certain age. Point being, ultimately, find your person or people, get invested, find your stories, your books, your TV shows, your whatever, get invested, get excited. Be a little less critical about what happens at the end because it is really hard to get there. And I hope that you find something, some person, some story, something that really makes you smile and stays in your life. So, we'll talk to you next time. Hopefully, you can give me a like and subscribe. If not, no hard feelings, but I hope you stick around. So, I got a lot to say, and I'm happy to share. So, have a good night, guys.